Hello everyone, thank you for joining me in my class again, and today we are looking at cells. My name is Mr. Quraish. We need magnifying instruments to enable us to look at cells because cells are very small. The naked eye cannot see them. But what are magnifying instruments? The commonest one is the hand lens. Sometimes they might bring a picture of it for you. You probably may not have this nice, fanciful, beautiful one in your school laboratory, but simply the design is the same. You have a handle and you have the lens itself. The hand lens is used for viewing small details of objects. Like I said, it is the simplest magnifying instrument that we can use for looking at details of small objects or small things. But the microscope is the one we need if we want to look at things that the eyes cannot see, or like we say, that you can't see with the naked eye. At this level, this is grade 8 level, you're expected to know the parts of the microscope and the functions of the parts. So basically, looking at the diagram, you can see it is made up of parts that are put together. It's a lot of things put together. You start with the base here that provides the support. That is where everything else is attached. And then you have this main body on which you have the stage attached. And then you have this knob for bringing the stage up and down. And you have the other knob called the fine adjustment knob that helps to make your picture very fine, very sharp. This bigger knob called the coarse adjustment knob. And there's the stage, that is the platform where you place your things you want to look at. And we're using pieces of glass that is called slide. It's transparent. You place it over the space here. The space there itself is called the aperture. And you have the stage clips so that you can hold them into position so they don't easily move away. And then coming up, you have the arm that is normally used for holding the microscope, and then you support it from the bottom. So you hold the top, that's the arm, and then you support the base. And that's how you can move around with it. It's something that is made up of precise parts. Any little fall or heavy shaking will cause it not to be able to give you good picture. Now at the top here, you have another body to which you have these revolving objectives, or some will call them objective lenses. You have different magnifying strengths. And at the top here, you have the eyepiece. That is where you look with using the eye. And down here, this end will be actually called the nose piece. Probably like when you're looking with your eye and your nose is closer to this one, but they all have their respective names. This is a modern microscope, so you have a source of light in the form of a bulb that will send light through. The previous ones were not having the bulb, so they use a mirror. So that means you must position your microscope so that it's getting good source of light, and then that light can be directed through the aperture here, and then light can go through the lens and you can able to see things. So how does the microscope work? First of all, let us understand it is used for viewing organisms. The microscope is used for viewing organisms that cannot be seen clearly without the naked eye. So for things that are small, can be seen but not seen clearly, you can use a hand lens. But things that you look and you can't see them, but you know they are there, you need a microscope so it will bring them, make them appear bigger, and then you can actually see them. So, like I said, you must know the parts of the microscope and briefly describe the function of each. Mention the body tube. Remember, the main thing that is resting on the base, it connects the eyepiece to the objective lenses. The arm is the part that connects the body tube to the base of the microscope, and the coarse adjustment brings the specimen into general focus. so that you begin to see the object. And then you use the fine adjustment knob so that you can make the picture very sharp, and you can see the details better there. The nose piece, you have a rotating structure there on which you have 3, in some instances 4 objective lenses. They have different power of magnification. Some magnify to a smaller degree, others many times, so that these objects that are actually very small, you're able to see them, and some they're able to see them into much more detail depending on the power of magnification. And then the stage I already mentioned is the base on which is a flat area wherein the slide is placed so that you can view things. And the stage clips, the metal clips that help to hold the slide in position so it doesn't fall off as you are working with the microscope. You have some modern microscopes. They have a stage height adjustment, so it's able to bring the stage up or down so that you can also move it left or right. Those ones make it much more easier to look at different areas. With microscopes that don't have that, you have to physically move the slide left, right. But with this one, yeah, you're just moving that knob. It helps you to view different areas of the specimen. The aperture simply means a hole. It controls how much light comes into the area you're viewing. If you need a lot of light, you control it so that it opens the aperture and more light comes. But if you need very little light, you make the aperture very small. Its function is to illuminate, bring light to the microscope. The light of the light source I already mentioned. Older microscopes, they use a reflector, okay, something like a mirror that reflects the light from external source onto the stage. But the most modern microscopes now use a low voltage bulb that will use electricity. You will need electricity so that you can be able to get light to be able to see things. The diaphragm is there as something that is adjusting the amount of light that is needed. Again, like I was saying, the diaphragm controls the aperture. So if you need much light, it makes the aperture bigger. If you need little light, it makes it small. The base supports the microscope, and this is where the illuminator is also located. So remember, we're trying to talk about cells. And cells are what organisms are made up of. So what is an organism? Now, an organism is an individual living thing that can function on its own. An individual living thing that can function on its own. It's capable of all the characteristics all by itself. That is an organism. So we have this bear, and on the bear you have bacteria. So the bacteria is an organism because it's capable of living on its own. It's capable of carrying out respiration, movement, and all these other things. The housefly, some young seedlings, us human beings, a snake, and there is even more here. So all these things are actually living things, okay? We have this. This is a fungi. They are also living organisms. So simply understand, an organism is an individual living thing that can function on its own. It's a complete living thing. But then, like we're trying to say, we want to look at cells. So there are levels of organization in this organism. All right, so if you look at organization, organisms, so probably there's something related there, but organisms have different levels of organization for structure and function. Now, humans are an example of a complex organism that has many different levels of organization. Let us look at it. We start from cells. So, for example, the nerve cells make up the nervous tissue. And then they build up to form the organ here, the brain as an organ. It is made up of nerve tissue, which in turn are made up of nerve cells. Now, the organ is part of the nerve organ system, wherein you have the brain, you have the spinal cord, you have the branching nerves, all working together. So all this organ system make up this organism. So you have the nervous system, and then you have several other systems all functioning together to make up this organism. So this is the level of organization in higher level of organization in higher organisms. Even when you look at the earthworm, it is also simply made up of cells, cells building up to make tissue, tissue into organs, organs into organ system, and all of this finally assemble to form the organisms. So a cell is the basic unit of structure and function in all organisms. The basic unit. You'll hear some areas they say the fundamental unit, the building block. It's like you want to build a wall, you need blocks. So all these blocks you put together, you make a wall. You have several walls, you have a building. So it's something like that in the organisms. They are made up of tiny cells that come together, and through the organization, they're able to form a complex organism. So the cell, once again, is the basic unit of structure and function. Structure, the makeup, function, things that the body or body parts are doing. They are the building blocks of life. I already mentioned that. All organisms are made up of cells. That's a very important statement there. All organisms, anything that is living is made up of cells, either one cell or more cells. And the cells are microscopic. They cannot be seen with the naked eye. All cells are below our vision. We can't see them, but with the help of microscope, we're able to see them. The body of this dog is made up of cells. The body of that leaf is also made up of cells. But cells can be unicellular and multicellular. And I place pictures of the unicellular here. We're familiar with amoeba, I hope, bacteria, you have euglena, and the paramecium. These are all single cell organisms, so we refer to them as unicellular. And the multicellular organisms are those organisms that are made up of many, many cells making the organism. Remember sponges? We have all these other, like some coelentrates and some other interesting organisms, that all of these have many cells working together to make them multicellular. So unicellular simply means one cell. Multicellular means many cells. So unicellular, made up of one cell only. The examples we showed you before. Multicellular, made up of two or more cells. All these insects we're seeing, they are multicellular. There's a starfish and an earthworm. All of these are multicellular, meaning they're made up of two or more cells. Unicellular organisms, they're relatively simple and small. In science, when we say simple, it means they are not made up of many parts, and hence they are not capable of doing many functions. They are the oldest forms of life on Earth, and they are everywhere. Examples of unicellular organisms include bacteria, some types of fungi, and protists. This is to tell us not all bacteria are bad. There are bad ones, okay? And they are called germs, and they can make us sick. But also, we have some on our body that are actually helpful, okay? They help us in digesting our food. They help in making some enzymes or some chemicals that we are not capable of making. And some actually help us, taking out some bad things that we or our bodies are not able to take out. So multicellular organisms are larger and more complex. Again, in science, complex means made up of many more structures. Simple, made up of few structures. So with multicellular, they are more complex. In a multicellular organism, each cell has a specific job or function. So that makes it very interesting. Huh? Each cell has a specific job or function. Humans are made up of over 200 different types of cells and over 1 trillion cells in total. All right, if you know your mathematics, when you look at numbers, units, tens, hundreds, thousands, and you go to millions, billions. Now we're talking about trillions, and scientists have a way of calculating things and estimating things. When we say trillions, that means it's a huge number. Somebody might be asking, well, how were they able to count all those cells in the body? That's another lesson for another time. But here, we try to classify cells. That means we try to group cells. They are grouped according to their design. They are either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Now, eukaryotic cells, they have a nucleus surrounded by a membrane. So the nucleus is there and there is a membrane around it. See, this is the nucleus and there's the membrane surrounding the nucleus. That is eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells do not have membrane-bound nucleus. So inside their bodies, the nucleus is there, but it is not surrounded. The nuclear material, because you have the material, which is the DNA, and then if it has the membrane around it, then it is called nucleus. But if you don't have the membrane around it, the nuclear material though is there, but it is not a nucleus, it's just the nuclear material. Now, what is a membrane? We say a membrane is thin, flexible substance that encloses something and acts as a barrier. They're similar to bubbles. If you make soap bubbles, sometimes you can have a little balloon like the bubble moving. Now think of how thin that is, and yet it is capable of trapping air inside. So equally, a membrane is something like that. It's something that encloses other things and it acts as a barrier. Just like the bubble acts as a barrier between the air trapped inside and the air on the outside. Membranes are very interesting, but then we come to prokaryotes. The prokaryotes are organisms that are made up of prokaryotic cells. Most prokaryotes are also unicellular. They are simple, they are not complex. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Now, look at the picture here. This is the nuclear material I was talking about, the DNA or the chromosome, but there is no membrane, which we have been describing, a thin, flexible something that forms a barrier. They don't have that. So the nuclear material is just scattered within the cell there. All right. They are usually much smaller than the eukaryotic cells and only have few internal structures. So usually you will not have a lot of cluster inside. It's just one or two or few things inside. Eukaryotes, on the other side, they are organisms that are made up of eukaryotic cells. So we are describing the cells as eukaryotic cells, and the organisms that are made up of that, you call them eukaryotes. The same thing applies to the prokaryotes. They are made up of prokaryotic cells. So all multicellular organisms and a few or some unicellular organisms are eukaryotes. Eukaryotic cells are larger than prokaryotic cells and more complex. They contain a membrane-bound nucleus. This is what gives them their name. Eukaryotes simply means true cells because they have a membrane around the nuclear material. And they also have other structures that are called organelles. They also have membrane around them. So eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes, they are much more complex. So here is a typical model of a eukaryotic cell. We're more interested here. Okay, that's the nuclear material, the chromosome or DNA, and then you have the membrane around it. This is the membrane. So that makes it to become a nucleus. So you only say it's a nucleus if the membrane surrounds the chromosome. But if the membrane is not there, it's not a nucleus, it's just the nuclear material. That means the material that is found in the nucleus. They also have organelles, okay? You can see different organelles in this cell. We're going to look at more of that later on. But eukaryotic cell, what is peculiar about them is that the nuclear material is surrounded by a membrane, and they have other organelles that are also inside their own membranes. So let us look at the cell structure and talk about the functions of the parts of the cell. So like all living things, cells require energy. They grow, they reproduce, and they respond and adapt to their environment. In other words, we're trying to say cells carry out all the characteristics of living things. Remember Mr. Niger? Some cells are capable of movement, and they respire so that they can get energy. They feed, they take in energy, they process energy, they carry out respiration, and they reproduce themselves. So cells actually carry out all the activities of living things. Now, even though they are the fundamental unit of life, that means the things from which everything that is living is made of, cells are composed of many smaller parts that work together to make them function. So we start from the lowest area. You have atoms, if you remember a little bit of your chemistry, all right? The atoms come together to form molecules, and the molecules form compounds, and these compounds form organelles, and the organelles eventually form the cell. So this is how the level of organization of the cell is also made up. Atoms to molecules, molecules to organelles, organelles to the cells. Organelles are specialized cell structures that carry out specific cell functions. So specialized cell structures, different cell structures inside the cell, and they carry out specific cell functions. Each of them has a specific job to do. They are built out of molecules, as we mentioned. So most cells, that is prokaryotic and eukaryotic, they have few parts in common. And what are these few parts? They have a plasma membrane or cell membrane. So whether they are eukaryotic or prokaryotic, they all have plasma membrane in common. Okay, what's this plasma or cell membrane? It's the thing that encloses the cell and regulates what materials can enter or exit the cell. Next, they have a cytoplasm. All cells, pro and eukaryotic, they all have cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is like a gel, a semi-solid liquid sort of solution that you find in the cell. Now, all of the organelles are contained within the cytoplasm. The ribosomes, these are responsible for making proteins. So they are also common to both prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And the DNA, this is the most important, everything is important, but this is the main thing that makes up the cell, okay? Because that is the one that contains the information about the cell. So the DNA is a molecule that directs cell activities and gives organisms their specific traits. Traits mean characteristic, or what it should do, how it functions. So the DNA, this is why you will hear the nucleus is the brain of the cell, because it's the one that directs all cell activities. So all these four are common to both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Plasma membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and DNA. So here we look at them. Here is prokaryotic, and here is eukaryotic cell. So the plasma membrane or cell membrane, both of them, DNA and ribosomes for making proteins, and plus the cytoplasm, the gel in which they are actually living. Animal cells, in addition to those things we've said, if we look at them, the cytoplasm is there, the ribosomes we already mentioned, we mentioned the nucleus, and cell membrane too. It's not labeled here, but or maybe it's not showing the diagram, but it's there. Yeah, the cell membrane. We have the cell membrane, we have the vacuole. So this is what a typical animal cell will look like. So you have all these interesting structures, the mitochondria. One is mitochondrion. We have these things that we call the Golgi body, the endoplasmic reticulum. So the endoplasmic reticulum you find immediately surrounding the nucleus, and outside of that you have the Golgi body. Like we mentioned before, each of them has a specific function they carry out. So let's begin with the cell membrane. Remember we said it controls what comes in or what goes out of the cell. And so hence, looking at the cell membrane which is surrounding the cell, when you look at it in detail, this is what it appears like. It's like it's made up of tiny units that are all joined together. But then they have some specific areas where they are able to allow substances to pass in and out. And of course that is controlled by them so that they allow only good things to come inside the cell, and they stop bad things from coming inside the cell. And then they can also control what is going out. So because you don't want something that the cell wants to stay to go out. So the cell membranes, we say they are a thin, flexible structure that holds liquids and other contents in place. All right, they say you can think of it like a plastic bag here, all right? So everything, you can put a lot of things inside the plastic bag, but then the bag itself is made up of tiny units, and at certain points you have areas wherein materials can come in and out. So here is the inside of the cell, and here's the inside of the cell, and there's the outside. So you can see these molecules want to come in. So this space here, you have these structures that control it in such a way, if they recognize it and they want to allow it, they adjust themselves so that you can see the thing is inside, and finally it will come inside the cell. In the same way, if something wants to go out, it will be the same process they will have to go through. So you can see ordinarily this cannot pass through, but because the membrane allows it, it has these structures that can allow it to let those things pass through, so that way it's able to control things coming in and out. We say it's made up of smaller molecules that stick together. They keep the cell contents from leaking out or going out, and control what substances can enter and what can go out. Next, the cytoplasm. We say it's a jelly-like solution filling the inside of a cell, and it is there to hold all the structures. If you look at this picture, this, it's transparent in this diagram, but of course this thing has been cut so that we can see what is inside. But that's actually the cytoplasm inside. Remember we said it's like a gel or like some liquid that is filled inside the plastic bag or so. And think of this picture here. So you can see particles, but then this is more like a liquid, so you have particles suspended inside it. And interestingly, it's a clear liquid, so that's why you're able to see all the other things that are inside. The nucleus, because it contains the cell's DNA, which is a very important material, then it is able to control the chemical instructions of life. It contains that. And so when you have the nucleus and then you have the DNA inside, and at some stage the DNA appears in the form of the chromosome, which has been taken out, and when it is spread out, we end up with something like this, which took scientists a long time for them to come up with the correct picture of what the chromosome actually is like. But coming back to the nucleus contains the DNA. The DNA is the chemical instruction for life, what controls whatever the cell is going to do, how it's going to reproduce, what it is going to make, like all the blueprints for a factory to operate. Then we have the ribosomes, okay? They are there to assemble proteins. The proteins are actually made by simply, collecting certain molecules, putting them together and make protein. And so proteins are what really most of the molecules of the cell, and in fact the organism itself, are made of. So the ribosomes are there to be manufacturing those ones. There is a model of a protein molecule. The Golgi apparatus is this structure here. You can see it's like a piece of tissue folded, and it's having some channels in between. All right, its function is to package and ship the proteins out of the cell. So when the ribosomes make the proteins, the Golgi body will collect them, and it is its responsibility to make sure they are taken out of the cell and taken to wherever they are needed. The endoplasmic reticulum, I told you, is this thin hair-colored yellow that is surrounding the nucleus. Its work is to transport proteins and other materials. Again, you can see it's having some channels, some space in between. So, and on it, you have the ribosomes. So when the ribosomes make the protein, the endoplasmic reticulum will ensure that they are transported to where they are needed, and mostly that is to the Golgi body. So the Golgi body will now package them like a postal system, package them and send them to their correct addresses. So that is the function of the ER, or the endoplasmic reticulum. Its function is mainly to transport the proteins and other materials. Lysosome, they're filled with enzymes that break down and recycle materials. Very interesting the way nature operates, because sometimes there are some, nature recognizes that certain materials are expensive. So when some materials or cells are no longer useful, like they don't just throw them, they break them down, collect important molecules, and that can be used again to build newer molecules and so on. So that is done by the lysosome. Try not to confuse the ribosome and the lysosome, and try to find a way to help you remember them. Ribosomes, they make the proteins. Lysosome, they break down. They are the recycle machine. And mitochondria, you might have heard a lot about this, because it is taught even at the lower grade 4, 5 level. Simply, we say they are the sites of chemical reaction that power the cell. They're popularly known as the powerhouse of the cell. These are the mitochondria, and like we said, their function is to produce energy by carrying out respiration. The respiration we're describing, that is the breakdown of food using oxygen so that energy is released, takes place in the mitochondria. So we look at plant structures. Plant and animal cells have many features in common, and there are a few differences. Animal cells have structures. Plant cells don't have, including centrioles, microfilaments, and microtubules. Now, when you look at the way cells divide, if you've heard of mitosis and meiosis, that's where you encounter this in animal cells, centrioles, microfilaments, and microtubules. Plants don't have those ones. But then plants have other structures that are not found in the animal cell. And those are the things we are going to look at. If I should raise this picture a little bit, you can see that the structures that are found only in the plant cell include the cell wall, this yellowish something you're seeing, and then you have the chloroplast, and you have a vacuole. This is something like a bluish balloon that you are seeing there. So those are found only in plant cells, not in animal cells. So take note, sometimes you could be asked to give names of structures found in plant cells that are not found in animal cells. It's simply a cell wall, the chloroplast, and a very large vacuole. Let's not confuse vacuoles we find in animal cells. They are there, but they are usually small. Some animal cells, some don't have any vacuole. But the difference is the vacuole here, this bluish thing, is very large. Vacuoles are there to store water, to help maintain the pressure inside the cell. This is why plant cells are said to have fixed shape, because they have this vacuole that will help to keep support in the cell, and then the cell has a shape. They say small vacuoles are found in animal cells and protists, so we don't forget that. And the cell wall protects and supports the cell. You find it surrounding the entire cell. Okay, and this bit you are seeing, this is where the other cells will be connected and so on. So, but simply the cell wall is there to protect the cell. And it allows only water and smaller molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide to pass through it. Again, think of it like helping this cell membrane, which controls what comes in and out of the cell. The cell wall is outside there. It's also regulating what comes in and what does not. Chloroplasts, they are concerned mainly with making food, okay? They obtain energy directly from sunlight and use it to make food. Here is a small cartoon showing the chloroplast, like when people relax at the beach, receiving sunlight energy. But for the chloroplast, it's going to use that energy to combine carbon dioxide and water so that food is produced. So we already mentioned the different parts of the cell. Now we're going to look at cells forming tissues and organs and organ system. We said multicellular organisms, cells in multicellular organisms are specialized. They have different shapes, sizes, and functions. So here are some cells that are specialized in the sense their structure is different from others, and the work they do is also special or different. Look at brain cells. They have this long, something like tails on them, or they have a long extension of the cytoplasm. Blood cells, they're like little flat balloons or like the inner tires of cars or so on. And the muscle cells that are having this interesting shape, okay, and they are also very flexible so they can stretch and relax. And you have the fat cells, which are there to provide insulation and keep us warm. And also, they are there to serve as a store of energy. They contain a lot of energy. Now, how do cells link with each other? How do cells communicate? I will try to look at it like the way we communicate in the real world. We say cells have special ways of communicating with each other to help make multicellular organisms function. So imagine something happening on your big toe, and your brain is all the way up there. It has to, your toe has to communicate with the brain. Or something happening to some part of the body, that information must go to the brain. So how do they do that communication? That's what we're trying to talk about. When you get a cut in your skin, your cells react by sending chemical messengers out to tell your other cells in your that your skin needs repairing. So once you have a cut, for example, on your finger, chemicals are released, which tells the other cells in the body, like the blood, so that they can produce some chemicals, and some cells will go to that area and they stop that. They try to repair that cut, because if it is not repaired, it means one, it's a gate for germ to come in, and two, it means the gates are open and the blood can be wasted. So because of that, your cells must communicate with each other so that the right things can be done, and that is what helps you to stay alive. So this is to make it look more interesting. So like you can see this cartoon here, this guy is shouting, look, there are intruders, that is foreign things are coming. Look, bacteria is coming, so others are saying, let's go get them and destroy them. Like in the real world, if you know bad things are coming, you go after them and destroy them. All right, so they respond to injuries to help repair or get rid of bad bacteria. So this is a typical explanation here. When you get a cut, you are asked to wash it. Why? Because these are bacteria on your body. So if you don't hurry up and wash it, this bacteria will enter the blood. And when they enter there, it's bad for you because they're going to multiply and make you ill. All right? But once you have the cut, your immune cells are working on this. When they get a signal that there has been an accident, then they begin to tell the body what to do. So when they get a signal that there has been an accident, they quickly arrive at the scene to help clean up the mess that has been done there. So that's your blood vessel, and you have the red blood cells and the white blood cells. But as soon as there's a cut, the white blood cells will move out of the blood cell, and they come and help to combat or fight whatever germ is around there. If they don't do that, your bacteria will enter your wounds, and they are going to make you sick. So remember we said cells combine to form tissues. And tissues are simply a group of cells that have a similar shape and function. And for higher animals, we look at 4 main types, especially for human, 4 types of human tissue that are available. And for plant, they have very simple tissue, whether it's the root tissue or the tissues found in the leaf and so on. But when you come to the animals, let's look at these 4 main types. You have the connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. These are the 4 main types of tissue. So every other parts of the body, they are made up of 1 or more of this type of tissue. Connective tissue, they serve as, the name says, connection. They connect other cells or other tissues of the body. So they support and bind, they connect and keep the body tissues together. They may serve some other purposes in the body, including storing fats and forming blood cells. So you have different examples here. This is found in it's the structure you have in the connected to the oviduct. Adipose tissue, that is fat tissue, and the fibrous connective tissue, that is the one that is helping to connect muscles and muscles to bones as well. And the nervous tissue is simply made up of the nerve cells. So you have the nerve cells in the brain, in the spinal cord, and other areas, okay? Nervous tissue is the main component of the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and branching peripheral nerves, which regulate and controls body functions. The epithelial tissues, epithelial tissue covers external surfaces and internal cavities and organs. So like the skin, the outside of the skin, and also when you look at tubes like the intestines and the lungs and so on, now the inner side of them, they are all made or covered by epithelial tissues. These glands are composed of epithelial tissue as well. They help to protect organisms from microorganisms, from injury, fluid loss, and so on. So these ones are found in the esophagus. These are found on the surface of the skin. And this one parotid epithelial cell and the parotoid gland that is found where you have the voice box. Muscle tissue are the different tissues of the different muscles. Skeletal, that is the ones that we call flesh or meat. The smooth muscles are the ones of the gut, and cardiac is the heart muscle, unique only to the heart. So muscle tissue, their main function is locomotion, and they're used for movement, and they help in moving food within the gut, and they also help in heat production. So organs, we've come from cells, we've looked at tissue, now we're looking at organs, okay? So an organ is a structure that contains at least 2 different types of tissue functioning together for a common purpose. So you have 2 different types of tissues working together. If we look at the skin as an organ, now you'll have muscles there, and then you'll have blood and some other tissue. If you look at the heart, you have the heart muscles, you have the blood vessels, you have nerves. So that's what we mean. An organ is made up of 2 or more different types of tissue. The ear as an organ too, you have tissues like of the skin, you have bones, you have blood vessels, you have nerves. So all the organs come together to form the organ system. The organ system is a group of organs that come together to function as a system. So in here we have several organ systems. Probably you can make out the heart, the kidneys. This could be the I want to say the bladder, or probably the ovary of a female. Right. So then the organ systems make up the organ systems. We're going to look at some organ systems. One is the digestive system. What is its function? Is to break down food into usable nutrient. When we eat the food, it's bulky, it cannot enter the body, but once we break them down, the digestive system ensures that they are broken down into smaller molecules that can pass into the blood vessels, and also they are in the form in which the body will be able to use them, and they help to take out waste products. So that's the digestive system. Later you'll be looking at the different parts and the functions. Okay, one, you're expected that you should be able to recognize that this is the digestive system. You should be able to identify the different organs that make up this organ system, like the salivary glands, the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder on it, the pancreas, the small intestine, the large intestine, the anus. So everything that comes up to make the system, you're expected to be able to name them, to identify the system itself. Circulatory system, likewise, okay, you have the heart and the blood vessels plus the blood that all work together to make the circulatory system. It includes the heart, the veins, the arteries, the capillaries, and the blood. Skeletal system, this is in charge of providing support and protection for the body. Its joints allow for movement. The skeletal system also produces all the red blood cells for the body and protects all the major organs. So the skeletal system is simply the bone system of the body. Muscular system is an organ system consisting of skeleton, both smooth and cardiac muscles, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. We saw them earlier on. So all of these work together as a muscular system. Primarily, they handle movement of the body. They help us maintain posture. I'm able to stand all this time talking to you, moving my arms and so on because of the muscular system. And they circulate blood through the body. So they are also a help in circulating blood because the heart is made up of a kind of muscles that help to pump blood right through the body. The respiratory system, the function is mainly to bring in oxygen to the body, and that is carried by the blood, and then also to get rid of all the waste that are produced by respiration out of the system. Again, like the other system, you are expected to know that this is the circulatory system, and you should be able to name all the things that make up the circulatory system. Primarily, there is the nose or nasal cavity, there's the larynx, and then the trachea, the branches of the trachea, the bronchus, the bronchioles, the tiny branches, the diaphragm we mentioned earlier on, and you know this is the right lung, it's the right, this is the left lung, and all the little tiny bits. So you must know that this is what makes up this system, and these are the names of the part. And when you get to grade 9, that's where you are required to understand and be able to describe the functions of the various parts of each system. So basically, this is the structure of life. This is the organization of life. Cells combine to create tissue. The tissues form organs, and the organs work together. They don't necessarily have to come together, but they work together. For example, you could have the heart up there, but it is working together with the blood vessels that go all the way up to the end of your toes. And all this organ system are what make you as an organism. So that is the cellular organization of life. And if we're to look at this picture here, we have an ovum or egg cell and the sperm cell. So that's the cell level. and they come together to create a tissue. And then you have the organ, you have the organ system, and finally you have the organism. So that ends our class for today. Once again, let me say a big thank you for sitting through this lesson. I know it's been a lengthy one, but I hope you were able to gain something from it. Once again, my name is Mr. Quraish. I do hope to see you in the next lesson again so that we can continue learning more and more. Thank you very much for your time.